Hey guys, it's 007 here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Harrier jump jet off the new Power War Thunder dev server. This is day one. Today I wanted to basically talk about the fact that there's a lot of things to go forward with when it comes to the Harrier out of all the things that are really being added to the game. Sure, we could talk about naval forces, the new graphics and all that. I think we could encompass the graphics definitely with the Harrier. There's a various amount of things that we can talk about, but I primarily wanted to go forward with the Harrier because there's a lot of questions I have, and I'm hoping that they can be answered. So, first off, with the Harriers, there's currently announced to be 4 Harriers. Britain will have 2, and the United States will have 2 as well. A premium for each, a tech tree variant for each. And I can link the basically the dev blog for the Harrier and all that in the description. Long story short, though, there's a couple things that are bringing to my attention, at least with regards to the dev server. I'm having to look at the premium one currently because that is the only one that's out currently in the game for the dev server for me to test. I'm not going to GE it just for the sake of that. We can simulate and talk about the different aspects of it, but largely there are some big questions that I have, and it encompasses a lot of aspects. But we'll go ahead and step in. We'll talk about how the Harrier operates flight-wise, and we'll go from there. Yeah, we'll do 1800, 6 p.m. And we'll do it primarily without the payload. I'll talk about why we're gonna do it without the payload. Some of the people that I've basically tested around with this stuff. Also, nice carrier, by the way. When it came to testing this aircraft, there were a lot of things that we had question-wise going forward. It really kind of felt almost unsatisfactory with the thrust performance, and this is the weakest Harrier out of all the Harriers. So it wouldn't surprise me that that could be the case. But largely, for what it does, it's very, very weak when it comes to flight performance, taking off and all that. Sure, it can do the job, but there's a lot of things that you're restricted on when it comes to performing operations in this aircraft. I have my controls currently set to Victor and Bravo when it comes to moving the hover. I had to set relative control, otherwise it would just automatically snap to 50%, angle, and that just sends my Harrier off to Ooga Booga Land, which is very fun. But as you can see, I can swivel the thrust and all that. It gimbals out of 100% is relative and all that. I really wish they wouldn't do percentages, really. More like degree angles. That would probably be a lot easier to, gauge the reference relative to the thrust and the center of gravity of the aircraft. I found, personally, though, 80 to like 85% is usually the sweet spot for, basically getting your thrust just aligned. And then from there, you basically go with it. It's very, very interesting because whenever I go into hover mode, or not hover mode, but, start operating this thing via hover, I start going into helicopter mode, and the thing about my controls is they're pretty much flipped on the keyboard when it comes to helicopter. And I mean that by my left shift key is usually my collective or throttle for the helicopter. But it's also set for missile on my aircraft. So it can be a little confusing. Definitely takes some, getting to know, but this is only the first day and there's a lot of things to learn. But once again, going forward, we'll just add power and all that. We're at the proper percentage for angle, so we'll just go ahead and add throttle. And as you can see, I can manipulate the direction, so I can reverse the thrust or take it forward. Very unique. But once again, we got to mention this is realistic battles, and I don't have any load on this aircraft, and it's barely, I'm max thrust basically at this point. Just trying to keep it, in a slight, controllable ascent. Descent definitely occurred slower. I mean, I could probably improve the overall lift by lowering flaps. Also, I should mention, right here, you can see that we have flaperons here. I think this is the first plane in the game. Correct me if I'm wrong. the first plane in the game to have flaperons that basically operate in that sensitively way. So you can see that it'll manipulate like an aileron, but it still performs the flap roll in the earlier bit. Controlling it's unique. It took a while for me to get the hang of it. I'm gonna be honest with you. I honestly was struggling with this thrust, and for hover mode, you typically are only going to play in that 10% pivot around the 80% or the 90% mark. You know, it's nice to have the ability to reverse the thrusters, but once again, you don't go any more extreme than that. Transition can be unique as well. You don't want to go too hard, otherwise you start descending. Like I'll show an example of it. Like you start dropping once you just jump right into it. It's very unique. Also, I will say one of the neat things with the Harrier, you know, how sometimes you have like helicopters or anything like that, aircraft that get, you know, you get too low in the water, then you just kind of get grabbed by the water and held back. But I've actually managed to take off from the water. So, I mean, it's really relative to this performance. You know, it's really tough to say, and obviously you can have a little bit more fun with it with regards to maneuvering. It has been fun trying to learn it, but I will say, for what it's going to be worth to have all these understandings and capabilities, you know, at your fingertips, it's really tough for me to say. I think it's definitely neat, and I tell you what, I had talked about it while doing the dev server. If you had told me, and I think I said this for the J35 as well when they added it, if you told me that Britain or we were going to get vertical takeoff aircraft in War Thunder, this next patch, I would have told you were a liar. As you can see, I'm doing max thrust, you know, flaps and all that. I don't even know why. It just said crash landing. I could assume that I'm toast. You know, that's the stuff that I'm talking about. It's been a little finicky. But anyways, we'll transition to forward flight and just go for it. Honestly, I really like the idea of a Harrier and the way it performs. You know, I like the idea of, you know, being able to do radical maneuvers. You know, full gimbal. Just really just take the, no, I don't need gear. Just take the full-on turn and just go to town with it. And definitely at higher speeds, it really has more to say. But we'll go ahead and take it inland, and we'll talk a bit more in depth about the stuff. Now, like I said, there were multiple questions I had when it came to talking about this stuff, and I'll explain some of those questions. The first question that largely came across myself was, what were the other Harriers going to get for weapons? And we spent, like I said, I ended up talking about it with an Australian about it, named Purple and all that. Hopefully I can get his like name in the description. You guys might know him. But we were talking about the Harrier and a lot of other aspects of the dev server, or not dev server, but the next patch. What can and what can't be done, and what the case was going to be in multiple instances. And it was a really good talk. I was really happy with it. One of the things that, when we came to talking about the Hunter, was what the weapons were. Now, this Hunter right here, or not Hunter, Jesus, the Harrier has basically been slated currently in game with SRAMs. But from what we looked at, you know, there was no such thing as SRAMs ever being utilized on this aircraft. It was purely in the sense it was utilizing, what would we say, it was especially like ACE-RAMs, I think is what it was called. So a longer range variation of the SRAM. And I think it was tested in the 80s. You know, something around there with that for regards. And there were other things that we were looking at too, like, oh yeah, what would be the case for, say, like the hunters that served in the Falklands, because you know it was a very confusing thing, and it really got into a lot of, I guess, more question holes than we were trying to find, you know, answers to fill them. It was incredibly, you know, deep with how far we were going to find out information. And I know it kind of sounds a little crazy, but this was legit the case. We were sitting there fumbling around trying to figure out what the heck is, you know, going to be the case. And for something like, what was it? Like this hunter, like we said, you know, there were cases where it was utilizing ace rams. The other thing was like saying, oh yeah, it's going to possibly utilize... What they're doing below me. Like the sidewinders, you know, I talked about variations of the sidewinders being utilized. And that's the kind of stuff that, you know, comes back. And when we were looking at sidewinders, I can't believe it, and I hate Wikipedia for this, but they don't tell you which variation of sidewinder was carried. And I'm sure if you dig deep enough on Wikipedia, it'll give you a list of what aircraft every aircraft had and all that, etc., etc. But for us, we just could not find it. And so we ended up going, and I ended up going to a Wargame Red Dragon, one of the Wikipedia sites for Wargame Red Dragon, to look at some of the armaments, especially for the American Harriers, because it was a lot of question marks that we had there. So sure enough, we go to, you know, this, and we basically take a look. And sure enough, it's talking about the AV-8A and the AV-8C. And like I said, we're taking a look at this stuff, and it's talking about some crazy weapons. Because, you know, it said for the AV-8B, which was the one that, you know, saw larger service in the U.S. Air Force, sorry, not U.S. Air Force, Jesus, the U.S. Marine Corps. You know, that was the one that would basically survive to do its, you know, legacy beyond, you know, in 2003 and everything. But what we ended up seeing... Hold on. Do the wheels rotate? No, they don't. I was hopeful that they would have wheels rotating in this patch, but... Yeah, like, for the sake of it all... We just never really saw anything with regards to... How would we say? The definitive version. Like, the AV-8B would have a 25mm Gatling gun. That would... I guess it's the same gun that was supposed to be planned for the F-35. But the American Harriers, the AV-8A, the AV-8C, all those Harriers basically would use the Aidens, as the British variants did. But, you know, it was a question... We were originally looking for the Sidewinders. You know, what Sidewinders would they carry? And the Wikipedia... or the wiki for Wargame Red Dragon said the AV-8A would carry AIM-9Js, a pair of them. And the wiki for Wargame also said that the AV-8C would carry AIM-9Ls. And that was like, wow. That would be pretty nuts. And the next question we jumped into was, what battle rating do you put, you know, aircraft like that have those missiles? AIM-9Js are definitely no laughing stock for those that have definitely operated in this game. They know for the fact that there is no legitimate, like, answer. Because we've never had an AIM-9L introduced to War Thunder Air. We've had it in the helicopters with the AIM-9, or sorry, the AIM-9, the AH-1Z Viper. That's the only instance we've really seen AIM-9Ls. And on the Apaches. Oh, I won't discount them. It is tremendous. Like, what battle rating do you put these? If AIM-9Ls are on an aircraft, like the Harrier, even for the speeds that it flies at, because it's not supersonic capable, I would still argue that it needs to go to 10.7. because it talked about even a countermeasures package like flares for the AV-8C, the C model of the Harrier for the U.S. Marine Corps. It's just, once again, incredible things to think about. And so many questions. And, I couldn't get any information. And back again with the British Harrier, about how it was basically running into the whole issue of, well, let's say, the GR3, which is the variant that's supposed to be the one that gets introduced to the British tech tree. What would it carry for ordnance? And like I said, that rabbit hole that we ran down trying to find the answer, we go and find out that 10, I think it was 10 Harriers was what we saw. 10 GR3s were put on naval duty during the Falklands War in 1982. So they had to go in and they were short-term modified to carry sidewinders, and they were basically set up to basically operate in respects like they had to get special modifications to handle maritime conditions, the saltwater corrosion, had to have special seals, specialized avionics to handle the flight decks, all this kinds of stuff. And, we were talking about the fact, like, oh, do you just give them that and proceed ahead with the whole idea of that variation being the one that defines the Harrier? And we named multiple precedents that had occurred before. The J35, being the D model, people argued, oh, it should or should not have, AIM-9J, the license-built version that the Swedish had. That debate was raging. Which variation do you give? And when it came to, I'm trying to remember what it was specifically for. There was like another, like instance of that in another aircraft. I forget what it was, but once again, like to highlight the whole thing. People are debating what these things have. There's a lot of flexibility here, and that's what's going to make really things greatly more confusing than hopefully they should be. But once again, those are questions that still need to be answered. I'm down for people that help me get those answered in the comments. The other one, question-wise, that we had was with regards to ground forces. Now, everyone familiar with the Harrier doctrine and the fact that it can vertical take off and et cetera, do everything basically like a helicopter. The question that we asked was, does it have the ability to utilize helicopter landing pads for resupply? Because that was a doctrine. It was designed to go and land on some of those like locations, rearm, resupply, and then jump back into the fight. So wouldn't it be able to utilize that? But currently the planes in the game, as far as I have known in the current game, don't have that capability. They're disabled from doing rearm and repair on those points. So what will it be? And obviously the friend I was working with, from Australia, he pointed out the fact that as a Harrier, you don't care really about how far away your landing point is, because you have the ability to fly like a jet aircraft and proceed to the airfield. And that's true. That's an asset that the Harrier can easily utilize, the fact that it can be a fixed-wing aircraft and have that efficiency. But to go back and think about it, there are times when people would rather land at helicopter points, maybe to hide, not give away the obvious signature that they are there, or they might have to do an emergency landing and not make the distance from damage that they suffered on the battlefield. That's valuable points that need to be made. And I'm curious what will go forward. I didn't want to buy any Harriers to test that stuff out. I don't have the GE currently. There you go. I don't have the GE currently to do that. It's just the way it is. And I had totally planned on doing it with the tech tree Harriers, but once again, none of those were present. So you can see my predicament with regards to answering those questions. So, like I said, there's a lot of questions to be asked, and not very many answers to basically satisfy those questions. Um, Definitely some questions, though, I feel like I can answer, being something like, do I think the Harrier is going to have a good impact in the game? I personally do think it will. Um, for its ability to dogfight, and actually, let's just go ahead and do that quickly. Let me lower the flap. There we go, take off flaps. Gear, and I'll just press it. I will say it sounds incredible hearing the Pegasus engine just go to life and just do its work. Let's see what we can do about this guy up here. I don't have my altimeter set either, or not altimeter, but speeds. But agility-wise, you know, we look at history. What am I even doing? Should be air battle settings. Yeah, there we go. I'm so good. There we go. Once again, you know, going back to the whole thing with the Falklands War, Harriers demonstrated themselves really, really well in defeating their opponents. They were largely dominating the airspace for their agility, and they had really, really good armament. And once again, you know, what variation of the GR3 are they going to hand us? Oh yeah, the other example was the F4C Phantom, being the fact that, hey, someone, you know, historically had operated 2 additional gun pods on top of the other one, but all the F4Cs in the game have the ability to mount those gun pods. So you run into that whole issue of, oh, I guess, you know, one case, you know, justified, yeah, then give them all that. Like I said, there's so many precedents in this game. Now, obviously, this highlights the fact that this thing can barely keep up with a MiG-15. So how, you know, could it respectively keep up in a 10.7 match? And that's completely fair to ask. And I think a lot of people are saying that its ability to get leveled up in BR is going to be down to the fact that it just does not have the speed. And, you know, I look at, you know, aircraft like the G91YS, the J-32B, the Hawker Hunter F6. You know, those aircraft are pretty much tapped out at 10.0. And basically their whole deal is, you know, they have to just deal with the situation for what it is. But once again, I'm firmly confident the Harrier is largely capable of going into the game. Even with all those questions and not very good answers, I feel like it still has that opportunity to really shine. Here, we'll use some of the vector control. Man, you just see this. Just so much control. Lovely graphics also. It's truly fascinating to think about it. I've never seen this thing go Mach. I tried. I immediately provided air brakes and reverse thrust in order to counter the descent because I knew I was going to be able to recover from angle of attack. Yeah, I just don't see it ever really punching beyond that. I mean, look at that slowdown. I mean, that's incredible agility. Who wouldn't want that for capability? I mean, it's incredible stuff. And like I said, I really feel like it needs to be answered. Um, Talking about other VTOL aircraft, I think it's definitely worth talking about the Yakolev 38. Yeah, I do think it's good to see Russia finally getting a carrier-based aircraft that largely can do the mission. Although the mission is kind of debatable as to what it can really do. Sure, it can do VTOL, but under certain circumstances. And that's another question I had as well. Was how much would the weather really affect the performance of these aircraft, especially the VTOL aircraft? Yakolev 38, in Afghanistan, it was noted that it really struggled. It When the air was too hot and the high altitude, good luck getting it to do anything, let alone take off. And it had very, very light armaments that it could carry. It largely just did bombs with guns or just did, maybe missiles. And it didn't have much in the name of fuel time either. That's the stuff that needs to be, answered as far as I'm concerned. And hopefully we can get those answers. Um, but yeah, it's largely all I have. I'm really curious to see what you guys think about how this thing, plays out with regards to the gameplay and everything. I think it has some unique capabilities. Definitely capturing points in ground forces matches is definitely something to not rule out. That's something I personally will love doing if you give me the chance. And I think this thing will definitely be a more dominant aircraft to utilize when it comes to ground forces. It definitely entices me to utilize it over something, say, I think currently I'm using... I forget I'm using in my British lineup. I can't look right now because they disabled all the presets going into the patch. Yeah, and you have to really be careful, too, as well, when it comes to descending with this thing. Because there is hardly any leeway when it comes to the throttle. Because sometimes you want to descend, and then you can descend so fast that you're beyond the point of recovery. Even with full, WEP thrust, in the VTOL. See if we can just get it. Might just reduce flap, but... It is definitely a fun aircraft to play around with. That is undoubtable and undebatable. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about for the recovery. You just feel like you start really just losing the thrust. Definitely cool and very cinematic, though. I did see the setting that there was something for with regards to controlling the hover, but I don't know if I want to mess with that yet because there's so many keys on my keyboard that have already been taken up. Go ahead and just do that there. Very pretty looking aircraft. Very, very excited to see it. Going beyond, I can't really think of much else. I'm sure I can think of the aircraft that I'm typically using. I don't have the Jaguar fully utilized. It might be just the Phantom FG Mark, or the FGR, I should say. But once again, like I said, punchline here, lots of questions. Oh, so many answers. Hopefully we can get some more when it comes to further updates in the dev blogs. And hopefully this patch goes smooth. I really have been impressed with some of the stuff on this dev server. The graphics are smooth. I was really worried about them being really, really glitchy, you know, flickery, you know, stuff that the old graphics engine had on me with regards to my performance. I have two 1080 Ti's and an SLI, and largely that stuff gets punished because it's not programmed for and all that. I know it's been a very big thing for the player base that have really poor performance computers to be able to handle this stuff, and hopefully they don't get forced out of it, because I know that can be pretty devastating. I know they talked about in the dev stream about that stuff getting really raised in performance requirements. Hopefully it doesn't kick people off this game. You know, a lot of people have invested definitely a lot of time and quite a bit of money in some cases. But that's all I can really say right now. I am excited for this update. Hopefully more good news comes along and we get some more answers along the way. Hope to see you guys out there. Have a good one.